Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography in Akron, Ohio, as part of our Ideas in Motion initiative. This episode was recorded as an ongoing documentation practice with NCCAkron visiting artists in 2023 to 2024. Today we join Christy Bolingbroke, our Executive Artistic Director, in conversation with Montreal, Quebec, and New York City-based Hélène Simoneau, and Chicago, Illinois-based dancer and collaborator Connie Shiau. Simoneau explores themes of intimacy, agency, identity, sexuality, and power in her work, and has been commissioned by Oregon Ballet Theatre, the Juilliard School, and BalletX, among others. She was recently a Choreography Fellow at New York City Center and received a 2021 Guggenheim Fellowship.
We typically start out this series with the same first question, and that is, how did you know you wanted to be a choreographer? And since we're meeting Connie for the first time, I wonder if you'd like to answer that question first.
I feel like there is sort of a need to create for myself. There's like a need in my body for me to make sense of myself or my relationship to the world around me. And I think the clearest way to communicate that is through movements and composing movements, composing body. And I feel like to me, I love seeing people in space. I feel like just having people in space, the presence is already a kind of storytelling.
And Hélène, when we first spoke, you talked about coming to dance and particularly composition quite late after you got to the North Carolina School of the Arts. I'm curious, since you welcomed Connie into our conversation today, how would you describe your creative relationship?
Our relationship has really evolved over different projects that we've done together and different environments that we've been in. I met Connie at Springboard Dance Montreal quite a while ago, and she was one of the dancers in the piece that I made, and really enjoyed that type of collaboration. And then over the years, when I was able and when our schedules aligned, we've been able to work together again. But I think more recently was when I created Delicate Power, which was a piece that was commissioned by the American Dance Festival and was premiered there in 2022. And so we were creating that work in a pandemic, starting out on Zoom. And some of our very first rehearsals were just Connie and I on Zoom. me in Montreal, Connie in New York. And so there's an intimacy that gets created that I really value. And then also Connie's been, whenever able, I've been able to bring Connie with me when I'm staging works in other places. And it's sort of a different relationship, but it's definitely grounded by the making that we do together in the studio. That understanding of like how I make and what it is that's specific to my work. I think Connie intuitively understands and also ignites and inspires within the process of whether we're creating in a context where she is the performer within the work, or if we're restaging something and we're talking to other people about qualities of the movement. I feel like Connie and I are very much, there's like an understanding that's built. One of the things that I've really enjoyed is that which was a bit of a surprise because I hadn't really thought of it this way, but when Connie and I go places together to stage works, we also have a little bit of time outside of rehearsal. So we eat together and we talk more. And there's something about that I find really fulfilling and just kind of further establishes the relationship.
Never underestimate unstructured time with food and beverage. right?
Yeah.
And the work is never done just because you're outside of the studio. It's constantly marinating and processing. Connie, I'm curious, both your work with Hélène, you're an artistic associate with Gibney Dance Company in New York. You have worked with many other companies, but you also make your own work. Can you describe what that's like as you shift from so many different operating environments?
I feel like I exist in the two different roles at the same times, but sometimes I need to set boundaries for myself what roles I'm in. Because I enjoy creating a lot as a collaborator, as a dancer, and as a choreographer. So when I learn a material, or I learn a phrase, and when there's a task to require me to make variation on the phrase, like my mind goes, like I love doing that. I feel like that's my choreographer within the dancer turning on. But in that role, I know that I don't cross the boundaries of trying to choreograph the piece because it's not my job. It's not my, it wouldn't be respectful doing that. And so there's always this, I think it's symbiotic, but also knowing within the symbiotic energy, there's also boundaries within that. So kind of knowing my place. And as a choreographer, I never let go my dancer body. I really enjoy physicalizing the movement, creating material in my own body. Even though I really love a collaborative process, I also love getting in there and trying it with the dancers, especially when there's partnering concepts. And I like to try it myself, see if it's possible, or like if it's too much to ask, and also trust that being a choreographer, that there's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of freedom and expression that my collaborators and dancers can offer.
There's something that I have found, even as a former dancer turned administrator and arts leader, we learn by doing. So it's particularly as a leader, I love that you're like, oh, I want to get into that choreography and see like, how hard is this idea? That it isn't just sitting at the front of the room and dictating, but you have to feel it in order to empathize or coach or continue to understand the momentum of an idea. I'm curious, Hélène, with the collaborators and dancers that you choose to work with, who are amazing in those roles and fantastic artists and choreographers in their own right, how are you navigating ideas of authorship? What kind of boundaries or parameters do you put around the process in the studio with that sort of collective authorship in mind?
I think it's super important to have the boundaries and with yourself first, and then to sort of step into that with clarity. I think sometimes things get a little bit confusing or messy, and we can try to, I think like one of the things that I find really helpful in working with Connie is that even though I know that she has her own desires and her own artistic opinions, and if I need to lean on that, I can ask her opinion about something, she'll have one. But I try not to rely on that so directly, because I really need to be the one steering the ship, and that's my responsibility. But if there's certain pieces of a task I trust her completely to make choices that are in line with what I'm trying to do. Or if there's something that we start working on and it's not quite working in the direction I wanted to, I know that I can just also say that to Connie, and that she's not going to take that personally. That we're just, let's go in a different direction, and we're unattached to there's not a sense of like needing approval. It's more about let's just explore some ideas. But I think I think as I move through every project, I'm learning about like what are the things that these dancers need from me? What kind of leadership do I need to give them? What kind of specificity do they need in order to move forward and do their job? What are the boundaries in terms of like how much do I want them to contribute? And how much do I want to really stick to my vision? And also, like, I think one of the things that Connie has really facilitated in Delicate Power is that I would give her something, we would work on it, and it would unlock, like in her body, her translation of the idea in her body then inspires and unlocks a whole different like chapter of creativity for me in my mind. So there's something about that where it's like to really honor like this. Connie was very instrumental in inspiring the entire work. And there's a work of 7 dancers, but at the core of it was my working with Connie as a soloist, and then really building that initial, like, what is the aesthetic of this work? I think that was really developed in Connie's body and in Connie's decisions of how she's going to respond to the movement idea, or even just to a task. And so I think it's always, in terms of ownership, I think it's always a tricky thing that I try to learn about with each project, and with each relationship. I think sometimes it can be super clear, and I think that's why I really love working with Connie, because there's an ease to our relationship.
There's something that in what, Connie, you shared earlier about your inner choreographer gets to play inside of a prompt, but through to a certain point, because you are honoring that it is not, in fact, your process, but the choreographer like Hélène. And then Hélène, hearing you talk about what this approach is and how you can have some ideas, but having someone like Connie who's so facile that really continues to stoke your curiosity, that keeps you outside, beyond the limited idea of what you walked in with, but that can unlock something to an even greater power. So it's almost like there's the shared skill and practices of curiosity. I also hear this sort of evolving nature, and it very much might instigate and start with the bodies in the room, and that it is the starting place, but it will change. I'm curious what you notice stays the same from an original work to being staged on another cast of dancers, and what changes with the dancers, the bodies that continue to realize the work, even though they weren't the originators.
I think what stays is the details, the information of the original material through the sharing. I think it is important to honor the aesthetic and honor the specificity, the details through my body, and also through my body and then articulating through language. It almost certainly will show up differently on other people's body. And I think that's when the coaching can happen, and then there's brainstorming with the dancers of how, because it shows up, because the details in my body through my language, it shows up differently in your body. How do I then be creative of my articulation again, and to lead you to where it exists in the original work and the intention of the original work. So I feel like there's always a lot of really fun challenges, especially how I facilitate this space. And I feel like that's the fun part of working with many different dancers. It's how information can show up so differently in different bodies, and how, like, working with their thought processes and how they receive information, and also how I receive information. It's always quite malleable to me. and then maybe come back the next day just looking transformed.
It's almost like having an outfit or something that's been, mass produced in one way in fashion, and then getting it fit to your body, to your measurements, to, your short waist or long arms or whatever may be specific to how something's going to translate. But it doesn't just come off the rack.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it.
Really, this is not formulaic. That's the human intervention, right? Yeah. I'm curious, given that you're both generators, that training may also come from some codified techniques that you're either building off of and or trying to move away from. How do you, as makers, navigate between new and old movement vocabulary, the sort of known, and then pushing yourself to find the unknown?
I try to, whether I'm choreographing or dancing or facilitating, I try not to describe a shape or a step as like a codified language, because then I feel like it creates such a anticipation and expectation of what it looks like. It's a swing, it's a movement, it's an action, like the gravity takes this over, so then the elbow leads. It's a drop, so it doesn't become a fourth position, it drops and then the legs spread away from you, or you feel the wind.
Beautiful imagery and sensory nature. Feel the wind. I'm going to think about that the next time I need to write an email. I'm like, whoo, that immediately, it made all the senses come alive.
Yeah.
I really felt that in a different way than executing the steps.
Yeah. It's interesting because I do find that a lot of my interest in form and shapes is prominent in the work that we make. And at the same time, I'm thinking now of like, I just love watching Connie teach the initial phrases and material, like the first few days that we're somewhere. And I do remember now, like here listening to you, I was just thinking like you really center how you teach the material from a place of sensation and what it feels like. And it does become very alive and three-dimensional, and then really alive in each person's body and how they respond to those tasks and those actions.
How would you describe your approach to virtuosity in dance? And I think that this is something that, particularly working with as many students as you have, their ideas in relationship to the steps may still be sort of in these boxes or containers. This is your Graham technique. This is your ballet technique. They're still on the sort of younger side, I think, and not just age-wise, but mentally, of striving for how high they can jump, how many fouette turns they can do, how flexible they are. And I'm curious, as you have now been out into the world and carving your own creative voices, how would you describe virtuosity in your aesthetic?
I think my idea of virtuosity has shifted a lot throughout the years. I was trained in a conservatory, and a lot of my training was ballet and Cunningham. And what virtuosity means within those techniques is super clear. What we're trying to achieve is measurable. And I feel like I lived in that space for a really long time. And then as I've gotten older and have had more experience in the space, in the studio, in making, I think I really value that virtuosity, but I value more, I think, the transitional spaces in between. And so I sometimes really see the maturity and the experience and the beauty of a dancer's way through the material in how they address the in-between steps and the transitions and how much value they place there. And I can see that with more experienced dancers, oftentimes that's a really rich contribution that they can bring to the room that isn't quite as measurable and isn't quite as easy to point to. But I see that virtuosity. And then I've also, think too about like mental virtuosity and concentration. There's this one part in Delicate Power that I really love that's very simple but very hard. And it's this part where the dancers come in one at a time. And Connie, I think you are in this part. They come in one at a time. I think there's 4 or 5 of them, and they start jumping just like in parallel first, just jumping. And there's like an addition of each person. And at the end, they have to do 31 jumps, and they have to land exactly as the music changes. And just the concentration of counting 31 jumps while there's other things going on, I find so beautiful. Like that every time they would get it, like that's the part I'm most in a whole piece. There's so much more traditionally technical things happening in this work, but there's something about that moment that just gives me such satisfaction. And it's the mental concentration and like the joining on, like everybody has the same goal and we're all in this together. And we just need to count to 31. And I find it very exciting, and it has like the same excitement for me as if someone came across and did like 6 pirouettes.
It's the virtuosity in the simple. Mm-hmm. And I think about cooking, where that sometimes the test will not be what's the most complicated dish you can make, but can you impeccably execute on the simplest and still make it exciting in that way that you described, like the last jump being all at the same moment right before the music changes. Connie, how would you describe virtuosity in your aesthetic?
For me, what I find what virtuosity means to me is, I believe, the ability to play with how gravity, kind of your relationship with the gravity in one's body. And I can expand on that. Like the relationship of going with, going against, and the relationship of the weight of your bones or the muscles toning, kind of going against, like how you're engaging your muscles. That can be a play with gravity. And I mean, all these, like I didn't, in retrospect, as a young dancer, I couldn't see this, but now like seeing all these codified technique, it's all about different play with gravity. Like we play with suspension. You want to jump really high, but in order for you to jump high, you got to send energy down or behind you for you to jete out. Or when you're descending, you need to have energy out from the top of your head so you can have like a soft landing onto the floor, and it creates texture. And that's dancing. That's textures.
Yes. Oh, and I feel like we're partly inviting people in and partly giving away all the secrets behind how you make dance look effortless. But that's the virtuosity, right? Like that's the appreciation, is like it looks simple. And yes, we're superhuman and amazing, but we are also human and have figured out how we're relating to gravity. Both of you have found like such fantastic careers navigating through this, finding your own way, relating to the environments. I'd like to invite each of you to share a piece of advice with your fellow colleagues, other makers in the field, as well as our dance students who may aspire to growing up, graduating, and going out into the quote-unquote real world. What advice or feedback would you like to give them by way of navigating a creative life?
I feel like I never really know what I'm doing. So I don't know. I mean, I have to think, I have probably had some advice in here somewhere.
But that's so amazingly honest. That in itself, I think, is huge.
I think there is something, I mean, this quote's actually inspired me to think about it a slightly different way too. There is something about whether it's within like a very specific trying to craft choreography, or if it's within the larger big picture of your career, I think making decisions is always, for me, the way to go. And sometimes, even if you're not sure, I think I've never done well just living in that space, the anxiety of not making a decision. And so there's something about like make a decision and then you'll know if it was the right one. And if it wasn't, you just backtrack. This idea that every decision is permanent is just actually not true, especially in a career that's like going to be decades long. So if you make a decision to join a project or join a company or move to a city and you don't like it, you can change your mind. You can find your way out of that. You can make a different choice. But I don't think there's anything lost in having made a choice. And there's nothing lost by going to a project or doing something that didn't work out, because whatever 3 months or 6 months or a year that you spent there, you've learned something that's going to feed. And I think that for me, like as I can think of it as a maker, like in the studio, if I make decisions and if I'm collaborating with people who are also decision makers, in their decisions and the decisions that I'm making, I can get a better picture of what it is that I want, what it is I'm interested in, and also eliminating what I'm not interested in. And I wouldn't get that same clarity if I just stayed in the default, no decision, the ambiguity.
Waiting for things to happen to you.
Yeah. Or waiting for someone else to decide, waiting for someone else to choose me, waiting for someone else to notice me. That's just a disempowering space to be in.
Support for Inside the Dancers Studio Conversation Series is supported by NCCAkron, the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts, and Audioteca, a global audio manufacturer with U.S. headquarters in Northeast Ohio. Our podcast program is produced by Jennifer Edwards. James Sleeman is our editor. Transcription by Arushi Singh. Theme music by Flaco Torres. Cover art by Micah Kraus. Special thanks to Laura Alicott, Sarah Durham, and Will Blake. To learn more about NCCAkron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCCAkron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for Inside the Dancers Studio. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.